away we go. Hello, good evening. Here we are. Let me introduce the panel. We are going to be talking about performance and the mind this evening. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judith Richards. I'm the creator of TRTP, the Richards Trauma Process. And we're going to be talking about what does performance have to do with trauma. Let me introduce Dr. Helen Mursell. Helen is a doctor of clinical psychology in Melbourne. She is also an extraordinarily successful athlete. And we'll hear a little bit from Helen. You can wrap that up in a moment. Helen and Sally Wilson, who was an incredibly successful opera singer. So from one extreme to the other, from the arts to elite sports. So Helen, would you like to tell us just a little, I know that you're very slow to sing your own praises, so if you don't, I will. Would you like to just tell us a little bit about your background in elite sport?
Okay, so in a past life, a few decades ago, I was a royal tennis professional I played royal tennis for about 15 years, and I was a professional full-time for about 6 years. And over that time, it was...
So Helen won the US Open and she won the Australian Open lots of times, like 6 or 8 times or something. So she was right there, right at the top of royal tennis. If people don't know what royal tennis is, Helen, could you just explain that?
Yes, because many people won't know that, and they won't be alone. It's the original game from which what we call lawn tennis evolved, where you play across a net as you do in lawn tennis, but you use the walls as you do in squash. So the tennis game that most people know actually evolved from royal tennis, and squash evolved from a game called rackets. So this started in the 13th century, I think, in the French monasteries. It's not a very good spectator sport because half the time you don't know who's winning. And in fact, my mum didn't really know the rules, so she just watched to see who was on my side. And when they clapped, she'd clap too.
Good on Mum.
She's not an intelligent woman. It's just very tricky. So it doesn't make for a great spectator sport.
And Kaz Clark says, do you know Arnaud Dommage?
No.
Might have been after your time.
Yeah, so I finished in 90. I retired in 95. Went back for another round. Managed to win, but it wasn't successful because I really didn't put the effort in. And winning is not about winning; it's about effort. So
yeah, okay. But in that first round,
and I haven't
you were
picked up a
extraordinary,
racket since.
Right? And in that first round, you were more than extraordinarily successful. And Sally, would you just like to give us a snapshot of your own brilliant career in singing?
Sure. Well, it started in the States. That's where I did most of my training, and then I sang in the States, the UK, the Europe, Australia, Asia, all around the place for 20 years before I had enough and stopped doing it. Yeah,
and so you were teaching.
Yes, so that was 7 years ago when I came back to Australia, and I did some teaching at Monash, and through a roundabout kind of route found my way to TRTP as a result of the teaching that I did at Monash. Is that a quick enough?
Why? Tell us about why. What you, as a result of the singing teaching, the vocal teaching you were doing? I
found that most of my students, and when I say most, I'd estimate 80% of my students weren't really coping. So here was I trying to teach them how to sing when they weren't actually resilient enough or in a position to have a career anyway, because it's a very difficult, demanding way of life.
Oh yeah.
And some of them had depression, some of them had anxiety, some of them had extreme sort of self-esteem issues, self-confidence issues, and with everything shows up in the voice. The voice is a reflection of what's going on in your body and your mind. And so it's very hard to teach people who are really struggling with those things.
You can't fake the voice.
You can't fake the voice.
No. Thank you for that. Thanks for that. And, a lot of people here would know our connection to TRTP. I created TRTP. Helen has been a fabulous student of TRTP. She's a graduate, so is Sally. So what on earth are we doing talking about performance and the mind? What's that got to do with trauma?
Well, the thing is, TRTP benefits people whether they've had vastly traumatic experiences in their background or not. So the mind obviously is going to have a massive effect on your performance. And if you have those limiting beliefs about yourself, or whether you're, you know, a really rigid perfectionist, it's going to have a massive sort of effect on your performance, no matter what that is, whether it's sport, whether it's the arts, or whether it's business. That's right, performing arts or in business. So here we're talking about, yes, helping people resolve their trauma so they can, or their distressing events of their past, so they can perform at their best. But we're also, TRTP helps people who haven't had traumatic pasts, who don't identify with the words anxiety or depression or trauma, or, you know, who've had great childhood. Because you can pick up things in your childhood, all of us do. They might be very little things at the time, but you pick them up and lo and behold, later on you become a perfectionist or you have imposter syndrome, or you just can't seem to kick the ball through the goal when it matters. It doesn't mean you've had a traumatic past. What do you think, Helen? What would you add to that?
Yes, I'd agree with that. So as a practitioner for over 3.5 years, and initially sort of, I guess, thinking that TRTP was to help people that had traumatic events or stressful periods in their lives. And a lot of people sort of coming to, because I'm a clinical psychologist, not everyone comes because they well, they probably do now, but not back then. They didn't come because they had traumatic sort of background. And what I've found over the years that it's so effective for so many people. I mean, it's just can be generalized right out. So, for example, people that perhaps do achieve a high performance are often people that might have what we call, in schema therapy terms, unrelenting standards. And these standards sort of come because of sort of more insidious sort of messages that are happening as people grow, as children grow. So, for example, if it's not necessarily in my case, but if someone comes with 4 A's and a B, and dad or mum says, what happened over here to the B? Then the message is that I'm not, 4 A's and a B is not good enough. Basically, it has to be 5 A's, or in other words, it has to be 100%, in which case I start to develop unconscious core beliefs that you know, that anything less than 95, or anything less than 100 is not good enough, so I'm not good enough. So these unrelenting standards come from unconscious core beliefs that have grown from a very early age. And so TRTP is all about being able to change those unconscious core beliefs. So, you know, it actually can be generalized out to so many different conditions. And that's what I think that's what's important about tonight, is to sort of help people to understand that just because someone doesn't have a traumatic event that happened in their life doesn't mean that they can't actually sort of experience the effects of TRTP, which enables them to get rid of the unrelenting standards. And once you get rid of them, you don't all of a sudden can't be bothered getting out of bed, and you don't do the training or whatever it is. You actually you'll be better able to perform at your best. So,
how does that work? Okay, so my unrelenting standards gets me out of bed early every day. I'm obsessed. I work myself into the ground. What happens if I get rid of those unrelenting standards? You said it doesn't mean I'm going to stay in bed all day, but what happens?
Well, what would happen is that I would be able to still focus, and I still have the drive and the grit and the determination and the desire to do well, but I'm not going to be pushing myself because, you know, with unrelenting standards, there's just there's a pressure to do better, a pressure of time. There's not enough time because, of course, you know, you achieve this and then you've got to achieve this and you've got to achieve this, and that leads to burnout, but it also leads to you know, sort of this internal critic that's kind of, here you are trying to hit the ball, and it's like, I can't believe you just hit that internet, you know, if you had tried harder, you wouldn't have done that, you know, or that's just,
what's wrong with you?
Yeah, that internal critic. So,
Yes.
And interestingly, what you said there about there's not enough time, because when we get stuck in surviving and just existing rather than thriving, one of the big symptoms of that is there's not enough time, it's not enough time, it's not enough time, there's not enough time. So our brain is in high beta all the time, and the sweet spot's not there.
That's right. The sweet spot.
The sweet spot.
The sweet spot's not there. And
it's not in high beta.
No. And you stop enjoying it. People stop enjoying their achieving because they're constantly it's relentless. I like to think of it as power versus force. You know,
I like that. I'm going to write that down.
I was a perfectionist. I like to say I'm a recovered one, and
I may have been too.
It's all coming out here, and really, it prevented me. It absolutely, now I can see it with complete clarity. It prevented me from performing at my best, because when there's that sense of force, you're not relaxed. You're not as relaxed as you could be. There were, you know, for a singer, really, if you've got extra muscles that are tense that don't need to be used at that time for singing, it's compromising everything. Your instrument is your whole body. And so with a sense of force, you're trying and trying and trying, as opposed to letting it happen. You put in the work, of course you put in the work, but at a certain point, there's a kind of release that needs to happen. And if you're constantly trying to be better and better, it's like living in a straitjacket. That's what it felt like to me.
And that sweet spot, Helen, it doesn't come when there's force. It's just that sweet spot where everything you do, you just can't mess it up. How do we get to that point of the sweet spot, whether we're a performing artist or an athlete? What do people mean when they talk about the sweet spot?
Do you want me to go, Helen? You want to go?
Yes, you can start. Yeah.
Well, how do we get to the sweet spot? I think, well, certainly, in my experience, TRTP gets you there, because you're not held back by those limiting beliefs and those things that are holding you back otherwise. For me personally, I had a teacher who brought my attention to the fact that my being a perfectionist was not helping me be a good student. And I was, oh, really? You know, I worked really hard and I thought I was a great student. So that's where my journey started. But it wasn't until I did this work where I realized, oh, so this is how it can feel. And it's not that I wasn't successful before. It's not that I didn't have great performances, but it was like, a bit of a revelation for me. I don't know about you, Helen. How about you?
So if I think about preparing for this webinar, you know, sort of perhaps pre-TRTP, I would have spent a lot of hours, you know, researching. And whereas today it's like, no, I'm just going to tell stories and it's going to be okay. And that's not, well, from my perfectionist point of view, that's not how I usually operate. You'd be very
quite
prepared
different.
And quite different. It's just sort of trusting I'm enough. And I'm just going to trust the process and actually so if I use this as an example, let my, for want of a better word, personality come through and just have a conversation, as opposed to being really, really planned. It's like, oh, hang on a second, you know, that's sort of a little bit like what it's like with sport. You know, if you've just got to relax, you've just got to enjoy it, you've just got to be present. And what TRTP enables people to do is to be present. Yeah. Because there's no unconscious core beliefs that is sort of sabotaging. You know, sabotage is a big thing, but I think you talked about that the last seminar.
We'll talk a little bit more.
Yeah. So that's
I think also, I mean, this might be obvious, I don't know, but when you're in your sweet spot, you're never fear-driven. When you've got unconscious core beliefs and limiting beliefs that don't serve you, effectively you're being driven by fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being a failure, you know, whatever it is, it's some kind of fear. And when
I better not stuff this up.
You better not stuff this up. Oh, here comes the high note. You know? Exactly. And when you're in that state, you're just never in a position to thrive and to do your best.
Yeah. And in terms of the science of the sweet spot, what happens is our brain waves slow down. Our energy, if you were to measure it, takes up more space. And what happens in our brain is things slow down. And it's just relaxed, and you can do no wrong.
And Jude,
but that brainwave state is so important.
When you mention measuring our energy, are you talking about electromagnetic
field?
Yes.
Yeah. I think this might be relevant, but I sort of have a probably my most significant story, my most significant win in tennis was the first time I ever won the Australian Championship, and it was back in '84, and I was just to give it a little context, in Rhode tennis it's like golf in as far as you have a handicap, so it's pretty obvious what standard people are at. So there was it was back in '84, I was just sort of coming up in the ranks, I guess, and somehow I managed to get into the final, and it was very clear if you were a gambler you would not be putting your money on me based on the handicap. And anyway, it was sort of down, it was in Hobart, and my father played royal tennis as well, and on the clubhouse room there were all the big boards with, you know, all the champions, and the veteran champion was next to the ladies championship. And my dad was there, and I started staring at this. I was 24, I think. Started staring at this board, and I was thinking, wow, imagine that. Imagine, you know, Werner Mursell, Helen Mursell, there forever, and wouldn't that be cool? And unbeknown to me, I was just staring at this board, and I was imagining what that would be like. And I was just, anyway, I didn't think much of it. That night I was particularly well behaved and had an early night, and while everyone else did things. And anyway, to cut a long story short, I played out of my tree, and I beat my opponent in straight sets, and it was like I was possessed by something beyond. I've never had that since. It was incredible, and that to me was because I was richly imagining and feeling what that would be like to have my name up there next to my dad forever, and I was imagining it and was sort of going through the process. And
that's what happened.
It was another 10 years, I think, before I actually won that tournament. And then I was up there, and that was how it went from there. So wow. The power of the imagination. So to what you were saying, Judith, I was clearly, you know, that in a different way, and it was just effortless.
In a different state. What also happens in the science of that is that we go into what science calls a state of coherence. Where our heart goes into sync with our brain waves, goes into sync with every system, every frequency in our body. And it's similar to taking the energy in an incandescent light bulb, and there's negative interference, and there's only a certain amount of pale light that comes out. But take those light waves and put them in sync, and you have a laser that will cut through metal. It's the same thing. And that's what happens within us. We go into a state of coherence, these lower brainwave states, and the coherence of heart and body out, electromagnetic field goes out, and we tap in, like you said, Helen, it's like we tap into something greater. It's like we tap into the quantum field where all energy, all information is, and magic somehow happens. And it's the best feeling.
And I think when I trained in TRTP and then sort of working daily with people, you know, that's what TRTP does, using the power of the imagination, and people richly imagine something to the point where they feel, and that's where the magic happens. And I just know that feeling firsthand from that experience. So.
Yeah, and you experience it again and again, and that the body and the unconscious believe what we ritually imagine.
Yeah.
So for the attendees, if you ritually imagine you've got a wedge of lemon, it's very drippy, and it's so sour, and there's so much juice. Oh, I don't know about you, but I have a complete saliva response going on here. My body is behaving as if I have sucked a big wedge of lemon. The body and unconscious doesn't know that that was just my imagination. It's just behaving as if that's true. And so Helen, looking at the merit board, the awards, and imagining your name up there so richly, and the body and unconscious go, oh, well, that's already happened. And then we tap in, and it's extraordinary how it works. And Sally, I'm sure you've got examples of that from singing.
I do, yeah. I mean, I think, through TRTP, people learn how to use their imaginations in this way, because, we know now that the brain responds electrically in the same way, whether you're doing something or richly imagining doing it. Your brain is active in the same way.
Yeah.
And long before I kind of understood this, I think this is mental rehearsal has been practiced in sports longer than it has in music. And before I sort of knew that, I remember one of the first competitions I went in was in the States. And I started just imagining actually my presence, how big I wanted my presence to be in the room. I didn't know what I was doing at the time. I was just kind of getting my head ready for this event. And it was an extraordinary experience because I felt it. I felt that kind of taking up space, and people responded to it in the most extraordinary ways. I had someone write a poem to me after that performance. And then, so I've used it in a lot of different ways for singing, and I teach, musicians to do the same thing when I work with them. You can work with it that way. You can work with it in improving your technique. And there's research that's shown that, when athletes mentally rehearse in their imagination doing their sport, that they need to do it in real time, otherwise it has little effect. I found that I used it slowing down things in my imagination, so I could figure out why I was adding extra tension when I didn't need it, and then speeding it up, and I was able to really improve my technique so much more quickly than if I'd just been practicing over and over and over. It was a very different and more easeful way of working. So it's a bit different to sport in some ways, in that in sport, you can imagine running across that line first, or your name up on the winner's board. In music, you can't prove that you're the fastest. It's not a competition. But there are so many different ways of using your imagination to your advantage.
To impact your body, to impact what you do. And it's interesting, the studies that have shown that they've got a control group that does nothing. You've got one group that does bicep curls, so many reps, and for 3 weeks, and another group that just imagine doing the bicep curls. And the people who just imagine it actually increase their strength considerably. We did it when I was doing sports physiology in Perth, when I was studying that. We were working with the American basketball team over there, the professional ones. You can tell I'm right up with it, I can't remember their names. But we had one group that didn't practice, one group that did normal hoops practice, and one group who just sat in a darkened room being taken through a visualization, a lived experience in their imagination of getting each one in the basket, every single one. And at the end of a month, guess who, in the tallies, when they came together to actually do a test, guess who had the greatest number of hoops?
The ones that imagined.
The ones who imagined, because every single one went in.
Yeah.
So they were training. And what happens is that the volume of the brain that's engaged in that process actually becomes bigger.
I learned quite a lot from quite a famous singer at the Met, who she had little kids and she was exhausted and she had these very demanding roles to play. Outside of rehearsals, she didn't practice. She lay down on the floor and imagined the whole role beginning to end and conserved her energy, and yet did the most extraordinary performances because her mind showed her body what needed to be done.
Yeah, we can program ourselves. And just, can we just go back a little? We've spoken about unconscious core beliefs and how you can change those. Who'd like to explain what is it? What are these unconscious core beliefs? What are we talking about here? Because
Helen.
this will impact our performance extraordinarily.
Yeah. So when we're sort of in from our mother's pregnancy with us through to the first 8 years, we are like little sponges and we're just absorbing everything that comes into our world, and we're also egocentric. So from a cognitive perspective, we can only understand the world according to us. So if good things happen in my life and I'm hearing, good girl, oh, that's well done, it doesn't matter how you go, you're fine, right? And then I'm going to take on those unconscious core beliefs that I'm good enough, the world's good, it's, I'm safe, I matter, all those sort of helpful belief systems that we'd want in our unconscious mind that can kind of form maybe healthier thoughts in our conscious mind. But if we're in an environment where perhaps those aren't the messages, like what we were talking about before, where maybe the message is that really wasn't quite good enough, or maybe someone grows up feeling like they only actually are visible when they're getting that goal or winning or getting an A or whatever it is, then those are the messages that are coming in, and that becomes the unconscious core belief. I have to be perfect to be loved, or I'm not good enough because I can't get 100% every time. And so these become our unconscious core beliefs, which are either diluted from the environment or reinforced, but often they're reinforced because they do come from our family environment, because that's what's having the most impact. And so these unconscious core beliefs then are sort of sitting under the surface, and when we're sort of consciously trying to think something, we can consciously think that we're all enough as long as we want to. But if our unconscious core belief doesn't agree, then it's going to go, well, bad luck. No, that's not the case. And our unconscious mind wants to keep us safe. So it doesn't want me to go in there and make a fool of myself and, lose that match. So it might actually make me, I'm sick today, I can't do that. Because it wants to keep me safe. It's like, you're not good enough, so don't go and perform then, because, you'll fail, and then you'll really realize how shit you are. So
yes.
Everyone will find out.
Or the other thing, which luckily was mine, is you need to work twice as hard as everyone else, because you're not perfect. You're not that good. So you just work twice as hard as everyone else. And luckily that kind of paid off for me. But there's a lot of pressure, and it took a lot of time and effort.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And one of those unconscious core beliefs that rises up again and again, whether it's performing arts or athletes or business people, is that sometime in early life we've been slapped about and we've learnt that it's not safe to be successful. It's not safe to stand out, to be outstanding. It's not safe to be seen and heard. And so our conscious mind, we want success, but our unconscious that runs everything, because our unconscious mind we use 5 to 10% of the day, and our unconscious runs everything the rest of the time. If the conscious mind's going, yes, I'm going to create success, yes, and the unconscious is going, no, you're dreaming. It's not safe for you to do that. So there goes your cruise ship ligament, because I'll keep you safe. I'll keep you out of the limelight. It's not safe to stand out and be outstanding. And so it's interesting how that happens, or we self-sabotage in some way.
And if I can sort of, I guess, equate this to other sort of perhaps strategies that people use that they'd be familiar with. So mindfulness being one, like I didn't know this is what I was doing until later, until mindfulness came around. But, being present in the moment, I used to say to myself, for a 3-hour match, just win this point, just win this point, just win this point. And if it went into the net, I'd be focusing on the next point. And so it helped me to just focus on what I was doing, and self too that wanted to criticize what I just mucked up and maybe I should have tried harder. It kind of went missing in action because I was just focusing on the point.
That's this point.
Yeah. So with TRTP and sort of changing these unconscious core beliefs to be more helpful and limitless, then we're able to in a much better way utilize the more common strategies that people would use for performance, which is to be present and mindful and in the moment and just win that point, or whatever else it is that they're doing, including getting plenty of rest, because they don't have to work twice as hard as everyone else because they're enough.
That's right.
And maybe they actually don't have to prove themselves anymore, whatever it might be.
And you're right, and it's not such hard work, because a lot of the things that I learned to cope with, nerves, with reviews, with the different pressures of that kind of life, they were ways of managing. Whereas when you're rid of those negative unconscious core beliefs that don't serve you, you don't have to worry about half that stuff anymore. You don't have to work nearly as hard.
And yet you still have an extraordinary performance, an even better performance. Better. Right. Because the stress, and it's a law of physics. For every force, there's an equal and opposite force. And if you stop forcing, we go into that sweetness, that sweet spot, that flow. And instead of swimming upstream, we're being just taken with the tide.
Yep.
So I'm a believer that I don't think there's a hierarchy of stresses growing up. Some people can sort of hear something and go, oh my gosh, that's terrible. I can't believe that was a terrible event. Other people can have insidious little messages that are just going along, like it could be that someone remembers when they were 6 and they fell over and they had a little drop of blood on their knee. And it's like, well, why is that? Why do you remember that? Or maybe they started to cry and Dad said, don't be a baby, stop crying. Or maybe there was no one there to support them and give them a hug. So these things that
can be
these
small.
are the things that are sowing the seeds for these unconscious core beliefs, that TRTP can sort of work with and just get rid of all that and clear the slate.
And liberate. I remember when I first started using TRTP, I didn't want to be around traumatized people. Because I'd had enough of that. And so I worked with elite golfers. And I'm talking about, international golfers. I worked with this one guy who was an Irish champion, and he all of a sudden would get right out in front where he'd normally be, and he would just lose. And it just became this pattern. He didn't know what was going on. And so it was simply a question of what happened then, just before that. And he had done something that he was not proud of. And so his unconscious was kicking in going, I don't deserve to win. I'm a bad person. I deserve to suffer. I deserve to be punished. So all we did was resolve what had happened, and off he went again. So it doesn't have to be massive trauma in order to get extraordinary benefit. When we get our unconscious and our conscious in sync, it's like taking the energy, the light waves in that incandescent light bulb, put them in coherence, and you've got a laser that'll cut through metal, and it's extraordinary. And it takes so much less energy, because it takes a lot of energy to live in that stressed state.
Yeah. Judith, there's a couple of questions from Fiona and Louise.
Okay, would you like to address those? How about Fiona? Fiona says, I'm finding this very interesting. Thank you, each of you. I'm also interested in the socio-political perspective. I'm assuming the model would include that as well.
it's all encompassing, really.
It's
life.
It's
it
life.
helps with life.
It helps absolutely with life. And in terms of just people's socioeconomic state, so much of that is impacted by our upbringing. You know, money doesn't grow on trees. I can't find the money, etc. It's an interesting phenomenon that people who grow up in wealthy families, even if they're not very bright, seem to find it quite easy to create wealth generally across the board. The percentages are there. So in terms of people who are doing it really tough, economically, it's extraordinary how after session 2 of TRTP, all of a sudden they've got a new job, they've got a promotion, something happens.
Clarity in their business. Yep.
Yes, clarity in their business. They stop self-sabotage, because I used to have this thing, well, there's never enough money. And so I would work my ass off to get a little bit of money together, you know, for myself and my son. And I'd think, I can relax a little. And what would happen? The dogs would get in next door and eat the snail bait, and they'd be in intensive care for 5 days. There's the money gone. Didn't matter what I did, it would always get wiped out, because I had this idea in my subconscious, not in my conscious mind, my subconscious, which, having been brought up a very good little Catholic girl, was that you can't be a good person and have money. It is harder for a rich man to enter heaven than a camel to go through the eye of a needle. And so I thought, we can't be a good person and have money. And so my subconscious was keeping me safe, being a good person and getting rid of all the money. Rats, until I figured it out. But across the board, this is what happens. The first thing we do is change those subconscious core beliefs to the positive. And how do we know what they are? Because of the pattern of someone's life. Like
everyone has a pattern.
Everyone's got a pattern. Like the up-and-coming young footballer who everyone says is going to be a star. And it's just weird how he keeps doing his hammy or doing his cruciate ligament or something that keeps taking him out.
Yeah.
Because I was doing this, I was saying this in a workshop in Sydney a little before COVID, when we could travel. And there was a very well-known footballer, a famous footballer, attending the workshop. And his legs started to go and his hands were going. He was getting really agitated while I was talking about this. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "That's what happened to me, isn't it? That's what happened to me. That's what happened. That's what took me out of football." Oh my freaking God. I can see it all now. Now I understand.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary how it works.
And Louise asked, how does TRTP work if someone doesn't have a memory about the event? It still works, because the pattern is there and you can still identify what those unconscious core beliefs are. You know, occasionally you'll have someone saying, well, I think this might have happened when I was a kid. I'm pretty sure, but you don't dig around. You know, because then you can create false memories. There's always enough to work on to turn things around.
You don't need someone to remember. Like some people who have horrendous childhoods, they'll say, I don't remember anything before I was 12. It doesn't matter. They don't need to remember. We can still resolve the issues of that young child before 12 without the memory. It's quite easy. Helen, do you want to say anything about that?
Well, you know, if I'm just thinking about a recent example where I worked with a young person who did have traumatic. We did several events, and then there was still evidence of she did have post-traumatic stress disorder. Not everyone does, and anyway, she did, and but she was still had the symptoms of it. You know, something was like I just could not work it out, and then over time there was actually another event there, and we didn't go there. We don't. I have a very good guess what it was, but we didn't know to go there. We just sort of knew who, and we just sort of created the event without, not the event, she just went in and she protected her young self against the person without actually having a memory of a particular event, if that makes sense. So I'm sort of, I don't want to go into the whole detail of, but she didn't have to, it was pretty obvious there was something there, and it's just sort of, we just create an opportunity for her to use the power of her imagination to become in an empowered state to protect that young self.
Yeah.
And boom.
Yeah.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. And sometimes, the subconscious is trying to protect you, and it suppresses those memories for a good reason, for a while. Often, sometimes you'll see a client and something massive will pop up after you've had a session or two that they just hadn't remembered before. But you, like Helen said, they don't have to remember the event in order to be resolved. Yeah. In order to resolve the issue, whatever it is.
You just have to take that person from the state of, I'm not safe. Because anxiety, what's behind that? Depression, what's behind that? I'm not safe.
Yeah.
Everything in my being is screaming, I'm not safe. Therefore, I catastrophize. I feel like there's something bad about to happen. And we take them to, it's over. Whatever it is, it can be anything. It's over. It's all over. And I'm safe now. And I think for those who haven't done this, it's a really good exercise. If I could ask you to just say these two words, it's over. Van der Kolk, Peter Levine agree that in order to resolve trauma, you have to take the body to a place where it's over. So let's just say those words. You ready? So I'll say it and then you follow. It's over. It's over. And feel what happens. Be aware. Observe what happens in your body. You ready? It's over. And feel that. Observe that. Now I go further and say that's not enough. We have to have the body and the unconscious know two things. It's over and, underlined, I'm safe now. So just let's do that and feel the difference. You ready? I'll say it and then you say it. It's over and I'm safe now. And feel that. Let's do it again and just observe what happens in your body. It's over and I'm safe now. There is such resolution there. And that's what we do with people who are stuck in that hyper-aroused state of anxiety or that freeze state of depression. That's what we do with people who are in a stress state of performance rather than in the relaxed, sweet space of performance. There's a question here.
There's a few questions. Amanda is the
boss.
One that we're up to, and then there's two after
Thanks, Helen. How does TRTP get into and access those unconscious beliefs? Is it through the power of imagination? Who'd like to do that one?
The unconscious beliefs become clear when you see somebody's patterns. So that's something that that TRTP teaches practitioners how to identify those unconscious core beliefs. You don't identify them through the imagination. You don't need to. They're pretty clear.
Yeah. So what we do is we give the client. Yeah. Sorry, Helen.
I was just going to say, sort of, they have a list of 10 to 12 stressful periods or stressful events in their life, and every single person, all three of us, everyone out there will have this uncanny pattern of what sort of repetitive things. So it could be abandonment, rejection, bullying, whatever, or it could be unwell or accident, it could be mistrust, abuse. Everyone has a pattern which sort of helps, and then the practitioner is able to sort of get a sense of what the particular unconscious core beliefs are for that particular person. But we also sort of cover all four areas of love, success, health, and
money. Yeah, so that homework is key. The top 10 to 12 most distressing events in your life or periods of extreme stress. Just the age you were, the name of the event, and who was there. We don't want the whole story. And that gives a snapshot of someone's life, and there's just such a pattern. And so from that pattern, we can say, okay, what's the pattern? And from that pattern, say it's abuse and bullying. Well, what are the unconscious core beliefs that hold that pattern so locked in place? And it's unconscious core beliefs like, I don't matter. And I'm going to swear here, I'm shit and I deserve to be treated like shit. I deserve to suffer. I deserve to be punished. And so that's what will play out for the rest of our lives until we change those unconscious core beliefs, and that changes the pattern. Because you can send someone with just so much abuse and bullying, send them to the moon, they'll find somebody to abuse them and bully them. That's their pattern. That's then what we create. When I found out that it's actually us creating it, when someone told me that when I was 16.
Yeah, I think a lot of us think that.
If I'd have known this earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah. So next question, Shan. Is there any example when the unconscious state is too optimistic and confident in its performance?
I would say that that's a form of self-sabotage.
Yeah.
If someone is overconfident, or they're not putting the work in, they're not doing what needs to be done, I would say it's not safe for me to be successful. It's not safe for me to do all the things that I need to do in order to be successful. That's how I see that. Helen, what do you think?
Absolutely.
Well, yes.
Sabotage.
Sometimes confident can be sort of the opposite. I'm not really confident at all. So definitely
Overcompensation.
Yeah, that's right. So
Easily
the people
fixed.
that are quietly confident are the people that have got that just, I've got this. I don't have to tell the world, hey, did I tell you?
Did I tell you how fabulous I was? Just mentioning.
And they're trying to convince themselves that they're actually good enough. So yeah, I'd say underneath that is I'm not really that.
Yes. And by the way, did I tell you I was fabulous? Yeah.
Mm.
So it's you can sort of pick them.
Oh, the questions are coming thick and fast.
Yeah,
Okay, this is great. This is great. When you working with young athletes, performers under 18 with pushy parents, can you work on the athlete without involving the parents? Thank you, Louise.
Good question. Do you want to answer that, Helen?
No, I'm happy for you because I tend not to work with under young people. So
I work with people who are under 18. It depends on the person. If they are mature, if they are in a position to sort of be able to make their own decisions and call their shots to some extent, then yes, I will work with somebody in their teens. But otherwise, I always work with a parent before a child. And in that situation, Louise, you'll probably have parents who don't think there's anything wrong with them, that they don't need to do any work. And then their kids
fix my child. Fix my child. They're not working hard enough.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually working with somebody now who came to me saying, can you please help my child? And I would almost make a bet that when I finished working with this parent, we've just had our second session, the child won't need it anymore. We'll wait and see, but her child is 7. So that would be my guess.
7.
Yeah, that would be my guess there. But if you have parents who are just going to be, pushy stage mums or pushy socket whatever, I would say that, look, there's a certain amount that you could do with the child, but really if they're going back into that environment, they're going to revert.
Yeah. So that's the sick fish. So you can take a sick fish out of a sick pond, clean it up, put it in a clean pond, it'll thrive and grow. Take a sick fish out of a sick pond, clean it up, put it back in that sick pond, it'll get sick again. That's why we always recommend that you must work with one parent or carer first to create that clean pond for the child to go into, because otherwise it's just going to get sick again. And we'll just quickly go through because we're running out of time now. Mola, when you witness a traumatic event and you did not remember some of what happened, well, it's usual that you don't remember what happened. That's what the brain scrambles, the memory gets cut off. How can TRTP help in a way that flashbacks will not happen?
It turns off the flashbacks. For people who have PTS, it turns off the flashbacks. It turns off those loops that keep
it's happening now. It's happening now.
It turns.
So if I just can quickly just say what happens. Okay, this person has witnessed a traumatic event. They've released stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline. The first thing that happens is the frontal lobe shuts down. The other thing that happens is the hippocampus shuts down. The hippocampus is responsible for taking that event when it's over and putting it into long-term memory and shutting the door on the warehouse of memory and saying, well, that was over. That's over now. What happens instead is it gets stored in the unconscious like a videotape loop. It's rerunning all the time. It's happening now, it's happening now, it's happening now. This is always happening, whether it's anxiety, low-grade depression, or full-blown PTSD. These videotape loops are running. That's happening now, it's happening now. My body's responding as if that's happening now. In full-blown PTSD, what happens is it breaks through into the conscious mind and we experience it as a relived experience, as a flashback. It's still there for anxiety or depression. It's just not bursting through into the conscious mind. So all we have to do is turn off those videotape loops. Hey presto, no more PTSD, no more flashbacks, no more nightmares, no more gut problems, and that's what happens. No more anxiety, no more depression. So it works the same for low level anxiety and depression as it does for full-blown PTSD. Helen?
And if I could just add to that, and it works in the same way for people that, if we go back to that example of the person that got 4 A's and a B, it also works
exactly the same.
Because that when the person's 40 and they're trying to achieve something over here, that it's triggering that video loop of, oh, that time when I actually didn't succeed because I didn't get 100%. And so it turns all that off. So then as a mature adult, you can actually go, you know what, I'm okay with 90.
Yeah, actually 90 is pretty damn good. 80 is pretty damn good. I'm enough. I'm more than enough. I'm more than I'll ever be called upon to be. And I make no apology. Because that was pretty darn good. Nicola, we all know that people who experienced trauma often blame themselves rationally for the trouble they experienced and unconsciously may want to punish themselves by avoiding actions which could be beneficial for them towards achieving some goals which would improve their self-esteem and a sense of achievement. It is important to bring to consciousness their hidden, irrational, negative thoughts which inhibit their capacities for achieving positive goals. Nicola, if I can just answer this one really quickly because we're running out of time. Their negative thoughts will never be controlled by the conscious mind because they're created from the subconscious. So trauma is stored in the subconscious and it doesn't make logical sense to try and deal with it in the conscious mind. If we say, I'm going to do a very, very complex infographic, there's the conscious mind and there's the subconscious. The trauma is stored here for the person who's had the dreadful experience. To try and change all of this from this tiny little conscious mind, which works 5 to 10% of the day, it just doesn't make logical good sense. So with TRTP, we deal with the trauma where it's stored in the subconscious. We do that by using the imagination. The body and their subconscious believe what we richly imagine. By doing this, we move people to an empowered position in regard to what happened, tell the body and the unconscious it's over and I'm safe now. And hey presto, those videotape loops turn off and the symptoms simply disappear.
So in that example, the person has got an unconscious core belief, it's my fault, blame me, I don't deserve blah, blah, blah. And so they're in the unconscious mind. So that's where you need to change those beliefs. I am enough and I deserve good things. I'm a good person, good woman with a good heart, whatever. And turn off that. And then the person won't be
in that state.
Sabotaging, themselves, and they will be achieving their goals and which will improve their self-esteem. It's like TRTP sort of does the groundwork, which then allows all these other processes that mindfulness, cognitive-based strategies, it just makes them so much more effective and so much easier to implement because you don't have this unconscious, these unconscious core beliefs that is just reckon things underneath.
Things. Yeah. That's a technical term.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just makes the work so much easier after that. If there is, often people just go, whoa, I'm okay now. I'm enough.
Yeah. And so what we do with TRTP is we just deal with 3 of those videotape loops and turn those off, the biggest ones, and it's like a 4-legged table. You take one leg out and the others just collapse. So you don't have to be there for months and months going through every dreadfulness that's ever happened. You just go for the top 3. There were, and it's never just one issue. There's always several.
Does
So we deal with those.
Does TRTP have any excessive borderline personality disorder? The short answer is yes, but there really needs to be sort of more work pre and post. So it's an adjunct to other treatment processes, but once again, it certainly speeds things up and makes things a lot easier. But there needs to be preparation, in my experience anyway, there needs to be preparation work, looking out for sort of the, because they have a very fragile sense of self and don't really like themselves, so it's very hard for them to go in as the protector of their young self, for example. And so there's just a lot of sort of, there's some preparation work that needs to be happened. So yes,
but at the right time, in longer term therapy.
Yeah.
And we'll stop answering questions at this point because we've got 1 minute to go. And there were people who emailed me earlier saying, can you tell me something about the training? The TRTP training is an 8-week program. At the end of that 8 weeks, you don't just have knowledge, you have experience. You have a mentor, one of the teaching team, to hold your hand through that 8 weeks and to advise you in working with your initial clients. So at the end of the 8 weeks, you don't just have knowledge, you've been working with clients, you've got a good grip on it, you've had somebody assisting you, and you know what you're doing. And that's just the beginning, because at the end of that time, you go into the practitioner community. Our practitioner community is a place of kindness, generosity, and great wisdom and incredible support. So if you've got a tricky case, you just put it up on our forum and people will come and help you. We have a 1-hour video conference call each week where you can bring tricky cases. There's continual professional development. We meet together outside of COVID and during COVID on Zoom like this. It's an extraordinary process, whether it's helping a business person to stop self-sabotaging, whether it's helping a single mum to stop losing all her money because there's always a crisis and a drama, as happened to me, whether it's somebody with extreme PTSD, like the veteran commando I worked with a little while ago, everything from mild to off the charts. TRTP resolves it as long as the client fully engages, and isn't that so? How all the time, the great philosopher Seneca said it's part of the cure to wish for the cure, whether that's the golfer who all of a sudden isn't winning tournaments, whether it's the singer who tenses up more of the body than is needed, or whether it's the footballer who keeps pulling a hammy or a cruciate or something.
Or whether it's just the person that's just not achieving to their potential.
Just not quite happy.
Okay, can I add something else about training? Not only does it absolutely benefit your clients beyond belief, it also, as a practitioner, it just is a wonderful sort of personal development. So day after day, you're just, creating the state in yourself that you want your clients to be in, and it's just so enriching. I just feel like every week I just personally grow from it. So yeah, it's an added bonus.
TRTP, the gift that keeps on giving. Mm-hmm. And the reality is that what we're doing now at the moment with mental health, I saw a statistic on the ABC online news that in the first week of Melbourne lockdown, there were 100 suicides in Melbourne. What we're doing is not working. It's not fast enough. It's not effective enough. I've followed, some people say, does this last? But I've followed some people for 8 years. And the reality is they just continue to thrive, continue to actually get better. So if something in this calls you, if it compels you, if you could just type in interested, we'll be in touch with you. TRTP is set to change how mental health is done. We are entering into research projects with Melbourne University, medical department, et cetera, to prove the process. We have to do something different, people. With TRTP, we can resolve epigenetic trauma. Trauma is passed down from generation to generation. If we look at what happened last century, we're on the edge of a tsunami. That's just starting to break over us. The dreadfulness that people have done to each other, the dread, the horror that people have lived through that's been passed down. So we have to do something more, something that's effective, something that works. So if you're interested, just type in interested and we'll be in touch in the next couple of days. Come and join us and help us change how mental health is done. There's no need for people to be in such pain. There's no need. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Dr. Helen Mursell. Thank you, Sally Wilson. Thank you for your wisdom. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for your generosity in sharing with us today. And thank you to all who've attended and all who watch this later on. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.